Hi everyone, I'm Sandra Moore, and this is my international conflict presentation about the Afghanistan War. This is the longest war in U.S. history and dates back to 1999 and is still presently happening. The Taliban insurgency remains resilient nearly 2 decades later. Afghanistan remains an important partner of the United States in the fight against terrorism, working with us to eliminate Al Qaeda, ISIS, and their affiliates in Afghanistan. Some of the key players in the Afghanistan war, obviously the Taliban. They've ruled most of Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, and their aim is to establish an Islamic jurisdiction there, or caliphate. Their anti-democratic way of government in which women have few rights. The United States is obviously a key player, especially after the attacks on 9/11. It became the global war on terrorism. Operation Enduring Freedom started in 2001 until 2014, and then Operation Freedom Sentinel started in 2015 until present time. NATO, in 2003, NATO assumed leadership of the United Nations mandated International Security Assistance Force mission. And then, of course, Afghanistan, their government themselves and their defense and security forces. So this is a map of the area. I just pulled this to kind of show mostly for the Taliban and Al Qaeda, but you can see there's many militant groups here. Here's Afghanistan, and this kind of light purple blue is Taliban. This darker purple is also a Taliban group. So they cover, you can see the majority of Afghanistan. And these little white dots with red around them, that's Al Qaeda concentration areas, and that's bordering Pakistan. And in that area, Kabul is right in the middle of Taliban. International conflict, the types of conflict and the reasons for this war, just about everything and every reason to have a conflict has been covered here. So I just kind of talk a little bit about each. Civil war, the Taliban taking over Afghanistan government. They control as much as 40% of the country or more. They waged war on the Western-backed government of Kabul and the international coalition groups and the Afghan security forces. Raids, those are done locally by the Taliban and extreme groups, the local Afghan government, and then, of course, U.S. drone strikes, which we learned about in our previous module. The Taliban attack Afghan civilians with suicide attacks. Limited, the U.S. trying to stop a behavior or Taliban taking over. So they're trying to stop the insurgent from forcing their extremism on the state of Afghanistan. Guerrilla warfare or guerrilla type of conflict. The Taliban and Al Qaeda, those extreme groups, they hide and attack, and they're not in uniform, and they blend into the environment and go into the mountains and hide and come out, and it's very hard to figure out when they're going to do that and fight them back. Hegemonic, I'm not sure how to say that, Taliban trying to take over Afghanistan and others. The Taliban is not a state per se, but they are a nation or feel like they're a nation, and they're trying to take over Afghanistan. And total war, Taliban over Afghan and U.S. over Taliban. So there's different players trying to take over the other. Conflict of ideas and identity, religious fervor, that the extreme Muslim beliefs of the Taliban and other insurgent groups being forced on as the only way for Afghanistan to be. Nationalism, especially from the Taliban. Territorial, taking over areas in the state of Afghanistan, as we saw on the map. The majority of Afghanistan is taken over by Taliban and other insurgent groups. Afghanistan is fighting for what their nationalism and identity is or will be. Unconventional conflict, terrorism, insurgent groups, and suicide attacks coming from the Taliban and Al Qaeda. Their persistence, obviously, we're almost 2 decades later, and this is still happening. So their persistence is unstoppable. Willing to violate the norms of international law and conduct. So these insurgent groups, it's hard to put them under the same category because they don't follow international law or rules, and they're much more willing to break those. So how can we apply the same rules to groups or players in this game, if you will, if they're not under the same set of rules? State-sponsored, the Frontline video alludes to it, and many of the articles I found that Afghanistan often just hides or aids or doesn't act on clues they've been given to where some of these extreme leaders are. 9/11, globalized terrorism, and I kind of did a little equation here. Counterterrorism plus technology, it comes to uncharted areas of war. This, again, only part of the players are actually following international law and rules of the just war theory. So it's an area we haven't been in a while. Weapons of war or threat. So terrorist groups will continue to use the internet for recruitment, spread propaganda, raise funds, collect intelligence, coordinate operations. Al-Qaeda, they pose continuing terrorist threats to U.S. interests and partners worldwide. U.S.-based violent extremist groups will remain the most prevalent threat to the U.S. Militant groups supported by Islamabad continue to take advantage of their safe haven in Pakistan. Pakistan deploying new nuclear weapon capabilities. They are maintaining ties with militant groups, restricting counterterrorism, and they enable these military groups to plan and conduct attacks on Afghanistan. Economic impact. Afghanistan's economic growth will stagnate, and Kabul will remain reliant on international donors for the great majority of its funding. That's kind of an idea that I have found through my research is what they kind of plan on happening. The war in Afghanistan began in 2001 and has cost us $975 billion, including estimates for 2019. Recently, researcher Ryan Edwards estimates that the U.S. incurred $453 billion in interest, on the debt, and will pay for that for years to come, and expects over the next 40 years the cost will add $7.9 trillion to the debt. Also, the cost of veterans' medical and disability payments over the next 40 years, saying that'll be more than $1 trillion. And so the future generations will pay for this debt. Links. This is a link to a conflict tracker. It's updated daily with current events and articles, and you can find different conflicts other than just the Afghanistan war. But I thought it was a very interactive site. There's slides that you can look through and pictures and just headlines and information there daily. So that's something you could look at every day if you want to hear about the conflicts and going on around the world. Thank you.